All right. So just to introduce this quickly, there's three parts to this part of the agenda. I'm going to provide a quick overview and context. Then Keegan Brown is going to give us a preview of the workshops that are planned for 2024. And then we're going to have a multi-stakeholder roundtable discussion and a Q&A. And we have some participants who, in this segment, in the roundtable, who are virtual. So let me just briefly introduce our stakeholder representatives. And I'm going to just do the quick introduction because we do have bios that are online, which you can go to. But first of all, Keegan Brown, who is a partner at Latham & Watkins, based in New York. He represents clients in complex environmental regulatory and litigation matters. Greg Challenger, who is virtual in Seattle today, is principal marine scientist and president of Polaris Applied Sciences. I think a lot of people know him in the context of oil spills and related restoration. He's been involved in nearly 200 large oil spills, pipelines, railroad, and shipping grounding incidents in the past 30 years, working with both government and industry. Steve Jones, Dr. Steve Jones, who is a population and community ecologist with over 30 years experience in consulting. We are particularly indebted to him because he's actually retired from GHD, and we find that a lot of people who retire from the government or from private industry, it's like, whoop, nope, not going to give you my Gmail. And Steve has really hung in there for us with his Gmail and more. So we've been very, very appreciative to his continuing expertise, which includes natural resource damage assessment, ecological risk assessment, habitat creation, etc. We also have virtually two partners from the firm of Downey Brand who are representing Steve Goldberg, who is actually the lead on climate. We'll talk about that shortly. Monica Browner is an associate with Downey Brand who works on various environmental issues under CERCLA, Clean Air Act, RCRA. Patrick Veazey is counsel with Downey Brand and also works on a lot of water quality matters based in California. We have Sally Niffen, who is, hopefully she's on online, representing the tribal community. She's an environmental specialist with the Saginaw Chippewa Indian tribe and also the newest member of the group's 20-year-old industry trustee standing committee, which I'll talk about in a moment. She's also a trustee council representative for the tribe on two natural resource damage assessment cases involving Dow Chemical with the Tittabawassee. I think a lot of people are aware of that, and General Motors in the Saginaw River and Bay. So those are well-known settlements and ensuing projects. And then Tony Pan, who is chief of NOAA's Assessment and Restoration Division and has been a terrific partner of ours, including also some of his other colleagues from NOAA for quite some time, and we're very appreciative. He's been working with NOAA on damage assessment issues since 1997. We do not have a specific person representing the state tribal the state community, but we do have a number of state representatives who are actually participants today. So perhaps when we get to our roundtable or our questions and answers, we might have some chat additions from one or more of those individuals. Otherwise, we will reach out to you following this session to get your input. So let me give you a little bit of background on the frameworks, how we got to the development of the frameworks, what the objectives are. We got to the development of it really goes way back. We've had multi-stakeholder practitioner meetings. We've had state of the practice meetings. It was clear that there was a gap, that there was no set way to think about in a common sense way PFAS and NRD in that relationship, climate and NRD in that relationship. Remediation and restoration we've worked on extensively over the years, which we'll talk about more today. And then emergency response and restoration we've also worked on, but have done more work more recently. So it really was to set forth a common sense approach, and we've had a lot of exchange with our federal and state partners as they were developed, various drafts. But the main thing is common sense way to think about it, and to see if we could get all the whole multi-stakeholder community to say, yeah, this is a reasonable way to approach this, so that it wouldn't be something that was ill-defined. So the idea was to have this be kind of a best practice way of thinking about these issues at the outset, and trying to get some good, positive communication amongst multi-stakeholders at individual sites. So we did keep public and private with outside of the group, kept generally informed. And the frameworks were basically viewed by everyone to be value added to the practice arena. They were originally developed by a multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary team internal to the group, and then we later enveloped this with multi-stakeholder working groups, which we have on all 4 issues, and some of you in the room in the government are on those working groups by invitation. And then we set forward next steps in fall 2022, that we would set up a 4th multi-stakeholder working group on emergency response and restoration, and we did that. The 3 actions following the fall were finalize the 3 frameworks that were presented in fall 2022, develop a framework on coordinating emergency response and restoration, and launching the 4th multi-stakeholder working group. So we did all that. So the group has a very long history on NADAR best practices. We've published in BNA, when it was called BNA, now it's Bloomberg or something. We've developed white papers over the years. And again, the group does not lobby, so that the individual members of the group might lobby, that's fine, they all do probably. But we don't lobby as a group, so that really the emphasis is on best practices, and the emphasis is on things advancing on the merits of best science, best law, best economics, other considerations. So this is just a quick recap. We set up internal working groups in 2020. Those still are operative. That would be member companies of the Ad Hoc Industry Natural Resource Management Group, as well as affiliate law firms and consulting firms. Multi-stakeholder, which includes others, specialists in some of the topic areas. We've set up workshop lead conveners, which I'm going to let Keegan talk about. We've also set up and invited resource partners on some of these topics pursuant to the workshops. Keegan will talk about that too. We have parallel track manuscripts, some of which have already been published and some of which are still a work in progress, and typically those are reviewed by multi-stakeholders, people in the government in particular, as well as sometimes academicians, sometimes NGOs. And then the last one is projects via our standing committee. The group has had for over 20 years a standing committee that includes, on an invitation basis, on an invited basis, 5 federal government agencies, state government, Indian tribes, and also 5 invited trade associations, industry trade associations, as well as a small number of member companies of the group. And that's been a mechanism, again, it's not lobbying, it's not policy, it's more the practice. It's an exchange to try to make sure that the practice arena is a good practice arena for all, if you will. So now I'm going to go real quick to the framework, spelled wrong, but it's okay. You have to realize that there's a couple, by the time that midnight came around a couple nights ago, I don't think we even knew how to spell our own names. But anyway, so the topics, as I said, are PFAS and NRD, climate change in NRD, remediation, restoration, and emergency response and restoration. And the organization of the framework documents, all of which are posted on the documents page of this meeting. And I have hard copy here, and there's one copy out yonder. The general construct of it is a quick introduction, the legal and regulatory context of the issue, the framework laid out step by step. These are not complicated and they're not long. They're not intended to be. They're intended to be quick ways to think about it, to organize thinking, to get to a reasonable assessment of what really needs to be examined, what's really important. And again, hopefully could be of great use in specific situations among multiple parties. We have some cost-benefit considerations in there as well, and then a summary, and then we have two appendices. One is a case example. There's plenty of room for more case examples, better case examples, and the other is some additional resources. So that's basically the structure of that. So before I turn this over to Keegan and we're going to be done with these slides, so I guess we're going to go back to just a general screen, and I'll sit down. Keegan, you can come up here if you want, or you can stay there. Does anyone have any questions on what I've just reviewed? No? Okay. All right. So you can just go to the main screen, I think, or but we want to, yeah, I guess that's fine. Yeah. Okay, Tara, is that okay that we just have the main screen back for the rest of this conversation?
Yep.
Okay. You just flipped. I'll let you deal with that. Okay. All right, so introducing Keegan to talk about a little bit of a preview on the workshops.
Great. Thank you very much, Barbara, and thanks to everyone attending both in person and remotely today. It's been a very enlightening and productive discussion so far. As we sort of turn our attention to the 4 workshop topics that Barbara mentioned a moment ago, I really want to emphasize what we heard this morning from Roger Martella about we're in this moment of transformation, and then what Dr. Levin just asked, the very simple and yet somewhat difficult question to answer of what does nature mean to you? These really are sort of key times as we look ahead to a lot of challenges on PFAS, climate change, other environmental issues. I think we all see that the importance of getting out in front of these issues and figuring out solutions to these complex problems is key. And that's really what these frameworks are designed to do, to put some structure around these challenging issues so that all stakeholders can have a process that we can go to try to work through them so we can make progress for the benefit of the environment. So the purpose of these workshops would be to hold a one-day workshop meeting. It would be designed to really go through the 4 frameworks in detail. There will be separate days for each of the 4 frameworks. The goal is to get folks interested in those topics to work through the framework, identify adjustments, improvements, issues that aren't yet considered but should be, and figure out how best to disseminate the frameworks and get buy-in and application across the multi-stakeholder group. As Barbara mentioned, in preparing for those workshops, we've been reaching out to some resource partners to help with the agenda. We may continue to reach out to others in that regard, so keep a lookout. And if you're asked to provide input, I please urge you to do so. It's really important that people participate. We have not totally locked in specific dates and locations for the workshops, but we do have some tentative target dates and locations, so I want to share those. For the PFAS and NRD workshop, we've tentatively slotted the week of February 12th in New York City. For the climate change and NRD workshop, we've tentatively slotted March 11th in Sacramento. For the coordinating remediation and restoration workshop, April 8th in either DC or in Boston. And then for the emergency response and restoration workshop, tentatively May 6th in Seattle. The focus again for each of those sessions will be to go over the go over the framework at the beginning. As Barbara mentioned, each framework has at the outset an introduction to the topic and a summary of relevant legal and regulatory developments. There will be likely a need for updates on some of them, certainly as it relates to the PFAS one, in which I have had a key role. I am sure there will be updates to the PFAS one. We could update it today and then probably again tomorrow. Then we really want to have, and this is the most important part, a open, constructive dialogue with a multi-stakeholder group to really improve the frameworks. They're simply that. They are designed to be a tool that everybody can get behind to help work through these complex environmental issues for the betterment of all parties. As part of that, we want to make sure that we're thinking through practical implications of the framework. So we would be applying hypothetical case examples to the frameworks to see beyond just the sort of esoteric level. When we try to apply it to a specific fact pattern, does it work? Where do we have problems? Where do we have gaps? Where do we need to make refinements? So the success of these frameworks necessarily depends on, the sound participation and involvement of a multi-stakeholder group. So we're hoping that folks across a legal, technical, and economic spectrum will participate, and then we will also have good representation across public sector, the non-governmental organizations, private sector, in-house counsel, business representatives. We want to make sure that we really have a good cross-section of stakeholders so that we're getting a, well-defined, consensus-driven framework that most folks think will work in practice. Again, the goal here is to really get, somewhere between 10 to 15 people to really roll up their sleeves and participate on these workshops. To the extent folks are able to do so in person, I would urge you to do that. It's going to be easier if we're sitting in a room together, but certainly we'll have remote participation for those who can't make it in person. But please do consider them, and I hope you enjoy the roundtable discussion that we're going to have about them now. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Barbara.
Yes, thank you, Keegan. I forgot to mention that at the after the 2022 symposium program here last fall, I believe we did a survey of everyone who had attended, and we asked them what's the highest priority. And maybe I'm getting this a little confused, but we asked people, what is the highest priority for moving these forward? And unanimously, people checked off workshops. So these are intended as workouts. These are intended as work sessions, if you will. But I think you have summarized, kind of what we're thinking. We want to make sure, though, that we get adequate state and federal and tribal representation. So, we need to be mindful of that relative to the locations. So while these are target locations, mainly because we've identified 4 lead conveners, which are all on your agenda, we want to make sure that the locations are amenable to people coming in person. We need a core group of people who will come in person. So we're assuming that government folks could take a train to New York, state folks going to Sacramento from Minnesota might be a little bit more challenging. So we'll have to see, based on my conversations direct with the different stakeholder groups. We'll probably put out a note to several of you to vet dates and locations. We want to lock that up pretty soon because the group has already embarked on its 2024 calendar, and we want to make sure that, A, it doesn't conflict with anything major, and I think we've covered that. We've looked at what's at least now prognosticated for 2024. But the idea is to really move these forward together. There seems to be unanimous public-private support for this. So we're excited about doing it, and I'm very indebted to the lead conveners who are going to try to move this forward and engage with our resource partners. And if you've heard anything and you want to volunteer, we're open. So, yeah. So, okay, so with that, Tara, I would ask you, my colleague Tara Wakeham Flynn, if you, who's online, if you have any additions to this before we move to the roundtable, and also how much time we have for the roundtable.
Nope, no additions, and you have about 20 minutes.
Okay, great. All right. So I'm going to pose some questions to each of you. I think that's the best way. I think the first thing would be to just get a response from all our roundtable participants, including those online. What do you think about what you heard? Let's start with Tony.
Sure. Thank you, Barbara. Thanks, Keegan. That's a nice summary there. Yeah, I haven't been in the details of the next steps and the workshops that are planned. It's great to see that we have a schedule. But as I was contemplating the panel here and what I see, where we go from the frameworks to the workshops, I think we're very much aligned. I think the frameworks are a great starting point for our discussions as we look at any particular case and the issues we might face, whether it's PFAS, climate change, whether there's an opportunity to do remediation and restoration in an integrated way. I think these are great starting points for all of us to have at our fingertips and to see, how it might frame our conversation and our actions as we work in a collaborative way to try and ultimately get to our end goals. As I think about the workshops, I think there is an opportunity, whether we say we're extending the frameworks or we're putting a little more details to, like, well, okay, in these frameworks, if we look at past case studies or we look at hypotheticals that Keegan mentioned, let's get into the details. I think that would be really valuable and productive to either further flesh out these frameworks or to highlight some of the things that as a community we can get further into, whether that's things that we see that there's room for improvement as we get into the specifics, where maybe there's some misunderstandings or miscommunications of where the respective parties are coming from, that if we can, that would be ideal. If we can identify those places where, hey, there's a miscommunication or there's a real opportunity for easy improvement, great. There will be other areas that are probably harder that we got to work through. Maybe there are some things that in part of these discussions we say, you know what, yep, we might have to agree to disagree on these things, but at least we've aired kind of our perspectives and we understand where each party is coming from. So I guess my big thing here is I love that the frameworks are a great starting point. I think as we get into hypothetical cases, past cases, we can make these frameworks richer or make the dialogue richer as we think about how we can continue our work together as a community. Easy wins, let's grab those. Let's talk about the things that maybe are vexing for us. If we can make some more improvements, great. If we have to agree to disagree, let's recognize that and not keep beating our heads together and
Methodological disagreements, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And maybe there's work that we need to do to help us address some of those things that are vexing us, sort of in a more methodological way or a technical improvements kind of way.
All good
I'll
comments.
stop there. Thank
All
you.
good comments. And, in other words, keeping our eye on the ball too, we are aligned these days that, where there are resources that need to be restored, that they be restored expeditiously and using good science, law, and economics. So we're kind of like all aligned in that. So the devil's in the details. But yeah, you got it. All right, good comments. Steve, what do you say?
You know, when I first saw the schedule, I was only going to show up here for the 2 o'clock, but I'm very, very glad that I came for the whole day.
Good.
That, you know, I can start with what Roger's lead talk about. He had some issues that, you know, really struck home. One of them, we are in a transitional period. That where private sector, private consultants, practitioners are becoming a big part of NRD negotiations and implementations. And I think by working together, allowing the private sector access to what's going on with the agencies, I think we can make 1 and 1 equal 3 instead of 1 and 1 equal 2. One of the themes is let's do the best science. I know as private practitioners that we were, up on the sciences right now, that some of my colleagues, former colleagues, aren't here today because they're at the CTAC meetings giving presentations. So, that might,
Sorry about the conflict.
well,
Yeah.
but I'm here. The other thing that really struck me, and this is being an old school ecologist, educated in the 60s and the 70s and early 80s, is the ecosystem mentality. You just can't look at one piece of the puzzle. You got to look at the big picture. And I think these frameworks will do a lot to allow that to happen. Another very interesting aspect to this, which is not currently in our best practice, but climate change has been big. I think we can do a lot to address climate change through remediation. How many people here have been on a large remediation site for an extended period of time? Look at all the yellow iron out there, all the trucks coming in, all the trucks going out. Just think of if you can combine the remediation with the restoration all under one umbrella, rather than completing the remediation and then going and starting up again at one or more other sites, with a carbon footprint. Another thing, and there's a great body of literature on the different value of plants to different types of ecosystems. For example, that if you take a coastal marsh, for example, how is climate change going to affect that? If we have sea level rise, we have saltwater intrusion. If you put it back to, let's say, a very stenohaline type system, but climate change will make it, more saline. Are the plants that you restore as it is now, are they going to be sustainable? And are they going to be resilient under future conditions? So I think this is a place where we can consider, what is the carbon capture ability of some of these plants? What is their salinity tolerance? What are their methane emissions? Because different plants have different, amounts of methanes that they emit. It is a growing body of literature in this arena. I think another advantage, and I think we're going to hear more about this in the next talk, but John had brought it up in his about coming up with a revisions to the regulations to streamline the process. I know it has been my experience that there are several constraints, one of them being that we've had agencies say that we have to do things in this order. And in this, for example, that we can't do a restoration plan until we completed an injury assessment. Sometimes that's asynchronous with trying to coordinate the two. And I know I'm in a law school right now, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but some of these projects I've worked on have really hit snags with the different groups, trying to negotiate consent orders, memoranda of agreement, that the earlier we can do this in the process, I think that the smoother the process will be when you finally get to the remediation and the restoration aspect of it. And one other thing I think also, going back to the best science, that a lot of the projects that I worked on prior to retirement are still using 1980s and 1990s technologies and methods. I think the science of restoration has come much, much further in the past 20, 30 years. And I think that working together on cooperative assessments will go a long way toward incorporating the most recent science into both the remediation and the restoration process.
Good comments. Greg Challenger, can we hear from you?
Yes, thank you, Barbara. First of all, thank you for inviting me to participate in these discussions and help facilitate. I wasn't involved in 2022, but I think the framework is an excellent idea. I'd like to, I agree with everything Steve just said, basically stole the thunder. And what Roger said earlier about focusing on outcome. I think here the streamlining and the focusing on the outcome to me is really important. I've been involved, I'm mostly an oil spill guy and been involved in a few CERCLAs, but mostly the oil spill emergency response. I've seen it work really well, where remediation and restoration go hand in hand. I know Gene is probably thinking I'm talking about BP, but I'm thinking of Olympic Pipeline and the creation of the stream habitat for all sorts of salmon up in, I think it was in Stevens the earlier speaker's neck of the woods in Vashon. But, you know, these things, in the past, they've sort of happened either by happenstance, like say New Carissa, yellow iron was on the beach, invasive beach grass was on the beach. If you get rid of the invasive beach grass, snowy plovers can nest. They were at risk from the oil spill. We had the yellow iron, we did it. Intense political pressure like Olympic Pipeline, or it takes courage from a responsible party or the government to step forward and be willing to do it in the absence of a crediting scenario or any sort of firm commitment. That's sort of been the mechanisms where it's happened in the past, and it would be great to see a framework, something that removes a little bit of the uncertainty that might result in fear of a decision, and go away from, you know, sometimes we get involved in years and years of studies that don't produce definitive results, cost a lot of money, and we end up with restoration that's either delayed or possibly less than we could have had we combined it. So I'm excited to talk about this, and I've chosen Seattle. I've selected Seattle as the May location, but I'm willing to go elsewhere. But I'd like to thank Barbara again for inviting me, and I look forward to this very much.
Excellent, thank you. Sally, I wonder if you have any comments on what you heard?
Sure. Hi. Thanks for having me. This is my first go around on learning about these framework documents and best practices, and I like it. I like it a lot. I think it's a good start. I do have a question for you, Barbara. Will these documents be available at any point in time for comments? And the reason, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but the reason that I'm bringing that up is each month, hi Emily, the tribes in the USA who have NARDA cases ongoing have a monthly tribal NARDA conference call. And we've had 3 national tribal NRDA conferences, and we were supposed to have another one, then COVID hit. But it was brought up on our call last week that we would like to see another conference, and I'm not volunteering, but I'm just saying I brought it up. And this would be a really good topic and a chance for you, Barbara, if you wanted to come and speak at the conference to gather input from a tribal perspective. So you don't have to give me an answer right now, or you can email me or call me later.
Yeah, no, well, let me just do a quick thing. I think these are still marked draft, or we've pretty much marked them draft for discussion, all this kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, particularly in the context of the workshops, there's room to modify these, and none of this is cast in concrete. This is a agreed upon direction and general consensus so far, but, improvements are, or, bringing value added information into it is absolutely a possibility. So, yeah. So as far as speaking, depends where it is.
Yeah, I don't know either. I'm afraid I'm going to get volunteered though.
I'll go anywhere.
And then just quickly running through these, and some of the previous comments that the participants made was this concept of doing simultaneous remediation and restoration. I can say that for our Tittabawassee River, NARDA, those were occurring simultaneously. And when it came to restoration, we would actually go out with Dow, and we have a plant specialist within the tribe, and they made an effort to incorporate not only pollinator species, but also species that were of value to the tribal folks. So that's another thing maybe people don't think about, because it's just because I work for a tribe, so I think that way. And then another thing, and maybe I missed it, but I would just suggest one thing, especially in the restoration work.
Mhm.
We worked with Dow and our Zebwing Cultural Society and our legal department to develop a document for unintended discovery in case there were artifacts, funerary artifacts, like hides or pipes, that kind of thing. And the tribe also has a TIPO. We work with a SHPO, but we also bring in our TIPO, Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, and we put together this guide for unintended discovery. What would you do? Who do you call? And protocol to where you don't touch anything, you take a photo, et cetera, et cetera. It's really quite detailed. And I didn't see that in the restoration. Doesn't mean it wasn't there. I just wanted to bring it up for consideration.
Okay.
But we can chat later, or
Yep.
right, maybe I need to talk to Emily.
Okay, we all chat, that's, so, okay, good, but good input, Sally, and we're glad to have your perspective too. So now I'd like to ask Patrick Veazey and/or Monica for any comments on what you've heard. Particularly, you are focused on climate, or will be focused on the climate workshop. So what comments do you have on what you've heard here?
Hi, Barbara. This is Patrick. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Coming in loud and clear.
Okay, great. Yes. So like everyone else has said, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. We're really looking forward to continuing this discussion with so many different viewpoints. Steve sends his regrets, of course, for not being here today, but we're all really looking forward to now shifting and taking all of these very helpful comments and feedback and shifting towards the workshops later this spring. I think from the climate change perspective inside and the working draft of the framework, it's been really great to attend all the panels this morning. Michael Gerard and Jessica Thurston had some really good conversation earlier today on climate change impacts. And with the current best practice framework that's been put together, it's great that I think we have 6 steps within that framework. And the second step is really intended to grapple with real world impacts and specific sites and climate issues that are relevant for those specific sites, like sea level rising, extreme precipitation and trends in ocean temperature. So, I'm excited to see that everyone's starting to grapple with these issues and look forward to the workshops and continuing to work with everyone on all of their various input and feedback.
Excellent, thank you. So now I would ask, we do have a number of state representatives who are in our general audience. So let me just give it a minute and see if anyone from the state community wishes to say anything via chat. And then Tara would tell us if you wish to make a comment. Tara, any takers?
Nope, not at this time.
Okay, no problem. I'll actually be speaking to the state community in early December. So, and probably before then, well, we're almost, isn't it amazing? How do we get to early December? Anyway, I know it's right around my birthday. I remember that. So, yeah, there'll be plenty of time to get input from the state community as well. So, Q&A from the audience. We've got about 5 minutes before we're going into the next segment. But I think that this was good feedback. And we may possibly, as the agendas are developed, do a quick survey of people and just say, what do you think of this, this, this? I mean, over and above the places and the locations and the dates, to get some input. You know, what should be the top goals for the workshops, for example? Do you agree with these? You know, things like that. So, any questions from the audience? Okay. Well, I think that we probably can move on to, this was, I thank you all. You know, this was good feedback. We're going to move on in 5 minutes. You can maybe stand up and stretch. I think that they've removed the coffee, I'm sorry. But you can, but maybe, but we're nearing the end of the program, so hang in there. But we're going to hear from Emily Joseph, and I asked her, I said, what's going on with those regulations? You know, what's stuck in OMB? She said, well, you got to wait until, we heard from Phil that, you know, it's going to be in the Federal Register on Friday. Yeah, Emily's been saying the same thing, but, so maybe they're going to show up the same day in the Federal Register. Anyway, looking forward to hearing from Emily, and very pleased. So